Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome to another episode of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Of course, I'm your host, Montel Williams, and I'm really excited about the important topic for today: cannabis legislation in Australia. How about that? Joining us is a very special guest, Mr. Matthew Rowland, an Australian cannabis lobbyist with over a decade of experience navigating the complexities of the industry in Australia. Welcome, Matthew. Thank you so much for participating in Let's Be Blunt with Montel.
Thank you so much for having me, Montel. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely, and just so people know, we are live doing this. What time is it for you down there in Australia?
It's about 6:30 here in the morning in Adelaide.
6:30 in the morning on Friday morning.
That's correct.
There you go. Yeah, I'm still sitting here in Thursday afternoon. So thank you so much. The technology brings us together, and let's talk a little bit. Tell me a little bit about what your background, your connection to cannabis. When did you get started, and how long have you been involved?
Yeah, we're time traveling here, Montel. So, look, my journey started back in about 2012 and 13, where I started to understand that cannabis had a medicinal use. I grew up in the propaganda of the Just Say No campaign, the tail end of that, and I eventually started seeing that people were consuming the product for medicinal uses. I saw the legislative change moving in the United States, in various states such as California, Colorado, Washington State, etc. And I just really wanted to get involved and get passionate about the potential reform on cannabis as a medicine.
Let's talk a
And
little about cannabis in Australia, though, because cannabis has been there for ever, right?
Yeah, look, there's contentious issues around the use. The indigenous population have used some variants of plant medicine for a long time. And there are the claims that there is a Cannabis australis landrace gene. So, like any jurisdiction or any country, there is generally a genetic throwback to cannabis use and cultural use of cannabis. And yeah, for many generations and millennia that we've seen the use of plant medicine in Australia.
Is the cannabis sativa plant a indigenous plant to the Australian continent, or was it brought there through some of the 1600, 1700 shipping going back and forth from Northern Europe and from the Far East? Or was it a plant that it was actually you could have found it there in the 1400s, 1300s, 1200s?
Look, we don't entirely know. What we do know is that hemp was brought to Australia, to the colonies, for the cultivation of fibre for ropes, yarn, sails for shipping, and we actually have instances of hemp and cannabis saving Australia from several droughts in history. So it is a plant that has been used and mandated by the British government back in the day for farmers to come out and grow cannabis in the colonies. So,
Same
look,
way, same way that it was mandated in the United States.
that is correct, yes. And so we there is possible links that cannabis made its way from India and Afghanistan right through to Central Asia, down into Southeast Asia, and ultimately to Australia. But it's very hard to make those links now that we have obviously that European influence.
Right, right, right. Let's talk about the current state of cannabis laws and the industry in Australia. What's going on?
Yeah, great. So I'll speak more broadly to medicinal cannabis first, and then move into where we're at with, say, adult use cannabis.
Okay, now
So in two,
medicinal was what federally legislated in 2016?
that's correct. Yes, in November the 1st, 2016, there was the legalization of medicinal use of cannabis, and then a number of years later, we had a successfully operating industry.
And so now has that translated over into a what everybody's terming legal recreational use, or is it adult use available, or is it just medical?
We're seeing the slow transition towards adult use for, say, personal cultivation and possession in the Australian Capital Territory, ACT, in Canberra. which is our home of politicians and our federal capital. So what we saw in approximately 2019 and 20 was a push towards personal cultivation and personal possession, but we're yet to see a regulated availability model for adult use cannabis.
For a lot of us who don't maybe understand politically and how Australia is structured, you have several different states, right? How many states in Australia?
We have seven
Seven
states
states
and territories.
and territories. And those states and territories have, do they have jurisdiction over cannabis within their individual states?
They do from a medicinal cannabis perspective, and also from a like personal use and cultivation perspective as well. It's very similar to the US and Canada, where you have an overarching federal bureaucracy that administers, say, medicinal, and the changes that flow down through the states there, and allow for a program in each state.
Has the recent revelation from the DEA in the United States had any impact at all in Australia? You know, the DEA is going to follow, excuse me, follow what President Biden has suggested of them rescheduling. Has any of that filtered down into Australia?
We have received that news, and we welcome it, obviously, with massive congratulations to especially yourself and the work you've been doing for the better part of a decade now. And I
Two
recently
decades.
just two decades of apologies, but in terms of what I've seen, in terms of the interview that you did with Sanjay Gupta back in the day, which was a big inspiration for me, watching you on the Piers Morgan show, we have seen some greater acceptance of medicinal cannabis as a result. But however, because medicinal cannabis was made legal in 2016 federally, we haven't seen that big impact that you would see maybe in other jurisdictions accepting that move.
Wow. Now, a YouGov poll released in January 2024 showed that over half Australians support decriminalizing cannabis, and half of its respondents between the age of 18 and 49 are in favor of legalizing personal use. Can you shed some light on how the public opinion is influencing your legislative efforts?
Yeah, look, it's allowing those conversations to be much easier at a state and a federal level, where we look to cannabis as an accepted product used and consumed by the public. We've got approximately 3% of GPs or general practitioners in Australia prescribing medicinal cannabis in some form, which means hundreds of thousands of Australians have now received medicinal cannabis since 2016. So we're seeing that normalization and, I guess, destigmatization of cannabis as a product, and it's allowing those conversations to be had at a state and federal level. And I've spoken with the likes of state attorney generals, federal ministers for health, and other politicians, even my state's premier, Peter Malinauskas, where they're looking at policies around cannabis and how we can best move forward on this topic as an accepted product. What I've seen, even personally, from going into, say, shopping centres and just doing basic polling on the public, is about a 70% uh, approval rate for legalization. And I think the oldest person I spoke to was about 98. And she said, I've been telling my sons for years that we need to move forward on this topic. So the public perception and ultimately the legislators' perception is extremely positive towards cannabis, and no doubt influenced by the normalization of it as a medicine. And I think every second or third person I speak to knows someone who's receiving medicinal cannabis or is receiving medicinal cannabis themselves for some sort of condition, whether it's a chronic pain, cancer-related symptoms, MS, and a range of other conditions.
Are there any significant studies or data that's come out that's helped to influence some of the legislative efforts? I'm sure that since 2016 they've been collecting data. Have they been able to publish anything recently of any breakthroughs that they've discovered?
Yeah, look, we see local efforts here through the Lambert Initiative, through various universities that are publishing studies and data on cannabis as a medicine. So we've seen several studies since approximately 2020-21 coming out showing that there's a large portion of Australians that are using medicinal cannabis, and seeing very little to relatively no massive side effects, as was stated in pre legalization propaganda, if you will.
Yeah, the sky's gonna fall. The sky's gonna fall. It didn't fall, right?
No, no, and that's what I speak to everyone on the day to day, especially with the ACT allowing personal cultivation and personal possession. What we've seen is a 90% reduction in expiations in that state since they've incorporated that policy shift. So the 10% that are left over are those organized crime people that the politicians have thought that was the main use of cannabis, and realistically, it's just people like yourself and I who are wanting to grow for maybe medicinal reasons or for recreational or adult use reasons. And so the sky has not fallen, and what we're seeing is an alleviation on the public judicial system, the enforcement, and ultimately that flows on to the incarceration system as well.
I mean, we saw something here in the United States in the this last about a month ago. Some polling and information came out stating that for the first time, cannabis sales have outsold alcohol in America. Did you know that?
That is correct. Yes, and we're seeing a very similar trend here in Australia, where we're seeing people put down the bottle and take up the joint, the bong, the edible. So
And
what we're seeing,
along with that, you're seeing probably some of the more violent crime has also probably gone down, has it not?
well, exactly. That's what I speak to on those expiations. And ultimately, what we see in those expiations is if there's less people being exposed to the black market, there's less likelihood that they will engage in other criminal acts and be influenced by those nasty individuals that prey on people who are just trying to seek out a product that they can't get anywhere else.
And also probably it's the fact that people using cannabis are less violent than people who are using alcohol and other hard drugs.
Exactly. The potential influence that we would see on domestic violence, I would say, would be significant if we embraced cannabis as any other product.
Absolutely.
You know,
As a funny line. I mean, honestly, if you see people on alcohol, they do it. They just jump right to the violence. Whereas a person on cannabis thinks about it for a while and then, nah, let's just chill. No, I'm just making a little joke. But I mean, honestly, I think most people who are utilizing cannabis are less apt to be as violent as those who are utilizing alcohol. Any period.
yeah,
Have you seen, similarities between legislation movements in Australia and other countries like Canada and the United States? Do you guys call upon data in the United States when you going out and making some of the speeches and presenting information that you present?
yeah. Look, I rely on all information from all sources that show that cannabis has a positive influence for legislative change. And just to speak to your point, I was recently speaking with a friend of mine who'd moved to the United States and is now a dual citizen. He can speak to that exactly. He can see people going and getting into their car from getting four lots of shots or whatnot at their service station, get in their car and be shooting back a shot on the way to the car. But when he sees people go into a dispensary or to a retail establishment, they're just taking their product home and staying in all night. They're not going out and causing trouble. They're not going out and driving inebriated. And so, just to speak to that point, yeah, like that's what the testimony is from my contacts in the United States. And so, I take all perspectives into account. What I speak to is the latest studies like those out of the American Psychological Society that show that although cannabis use and disorder are consistently associated with increased risk of psychosis, the present results suggest that association is likely attributable to familial connections, and that we need to investigate other issues.
You're so right because I mean, one of the things is that as equally, first off, there's over 3,500 peer-reviewed published documents worldwide being published on cannabis every single year. There's been probably 35,000 of them to date, and making cannabis probably one of the most published medications in the world when it comes to peer-reviewed studies. And what we're finding is that because the alcohol and tobacco lobby around the world is so afraid of what's happening, they are trying to just throw out random bullshit comments you'll read an article, and then you will dig down into the article. It's not backed up by any scientific research. It's just some one guy decided to say, "Well, I think cannabis is really the this, the that, the this, that," and it's really way off. Are you being challenged that way in Australia? Where I'm sure that there is that diehard group of people who don't even understand why cannabis was made illegal to begin with.
You're exactly right, Montel. I got into this, a decade back, looking at the Granny Stormcrow list. If you've ever heard of that, it's sort of encyclopedia on all the studies that were sort of published up until then, and it was run on someone's, server, showing all the different uses and myriad of uses, and you couldn't read the list, even if you spent one day a week reading every single study.
For the
It would
rest
be
of
a
your life.
virtual. Exactly right, for the rest of your life, so you'd never get anything done, but you would certainly be a cannabis expert by the end of it. That's for sure. Look, what we're seeing, and I've sat next to these lobbyists, like you're saying, mostly from the pharmaceutical side of things, and heard them say, look, medicinal cannabis is not a thing. It's not going to be a thing for 10 years, etc., until there's a formulated product or something like that. And now we're seeing hundreds of thousands of Australians receiving medicinal cannabis with very limited side effects, and great quality improvements in their life. People getting off of opioids, etc.
When you just made that comment, it's as if we do have plant-based medicines that we figured out that along the way we could not replicate synthetically, and cannabis is going to be one of those plants that is going to be they're not going to be able to replicate it synthetically because it's got probably somewhere around 300 constituent components, not just cannabinoids, but the flavonoids and the terpenes. All those things together actually elicit the different responses that it has. We're starting to figure out now, all the cannabinoids have an acid version that is more bioavailable than the non-acid version. So the truth of the matter is, we will probably never be able to synthesize something like this the same way as they can't synthesize tamoxifen, which is a cancer drug that is plant based, that they use probably most of the extract from the plant itself because they have the inability to synthesize that. It's almost
Yeah,
as
look,
if scientists want to think that they are God and not God was God.
that's correct. Look, we established pharmacology from plants, and trying to, like you say, make those formulations more repeatable, than are found in nature. But we've failed on that, and we could look to the French study. I'm not sure if you're aware, where they tried to synthesize THC, and it caused brain damage in some of the recipients, and tragic outcomes, and in very small study cohorts as well. I think there were approximately 6 to 8 people from a 30 odd cohort that had received significant side effects, and that study was pulled immediately.
That's the same
And
thing with the Marinol, the crap that they created in the United States, which was supposed to be a replica of THC Delta 9, which we now know isn't a replica. It's probably one of the most expensive drugs in the marketplace and one of the least used drugs because it causes so many different forms of side effects. And we know that's because we as mammals, along with all the other mammals on this planet, have this thing that's inside of us that's called an endocannabinoid system. That endocannabinoid system is antagonized by plant-based cannabis, but we make our own cannabinoids. So, we've still not been able to replicate anandamide. We've not been able to replicate 2-AG, the chemicals that are the components of a couple of the cannabinoids that we actually make. Had you never, touched cannabis in your life, plant-based cannabis, I could test you and find those cannabinoids in your body. Why? Because that's part of our sympathetic nervous system that helps to control, the retroactive response in the body. So we're never going to be at that point where I think we're going to be able to replicate that. And if we can't replicate that, then how can we replicate a plant that antagonizes that? So science needs to just back off. There's, again, as long as we think we're God, people are going to remain sick.
yeah, look, we need to really look at the science, and the science that isn't paid for. And I'm a big advocate for getting money out of science and getting money out of politics, because it influences into the detriment of the general public what they can have access to in terms of the medicine. Because I can speak to one example in 2015, 16. I knew an individual going through a pharmaceutical science degree in Adelaide here in South Australia, where they were studying to become a pharmacist essentially, or even to go on and work in a laboratory and then be synthesizing these drugs. That they 6 months into their degree were tasked with evaluating natural therapies or natural products, and they chose cannabis. And just by the nature of choosing cannabis, they were told that they would receive at maximum a pass mark of 50%, purely because that the grader, who may well be an assistant professor or otherwise, could not provide the grading on that particular assignment, because we still don't have any teaching of the endogenous cannabinoid system in the education system, because there's a fear there that if we evaluate this, that it may prove that other products are inherently redundant, and that there's a safer alternative, like you're saying, that can't be patented, that can't be replicated through some synthesis in a lab without some nasty side effect.
I mean, we know for a fact, and at least the science has been done in the last 4 or 5 years on the endocannabinoid system, and has been done the same science that was done 50 years ago by Raphael Mechoulam in Israel. We understand that sympathetic, and I'm using it to use a term this way, but that secondary nervous system that we have within our body helps to control our cellular homeostasis. We know that the endocannabinoid system and those chemicals actually help to cleanse the cells at the mitochondrial level. So we understanding that, we have not done the requisite research on that, but I kind of feel like, I'm sorry, mankind thinks it knows everything, but it doesn't. And we may be a couple hundred years away from being able to truly understand how this system even works from an intellectual standpoint and our evolution. So, the truth of the matter is, they can do all the studies that they want to do right now. I don't think they'll come up with the answers, because we have not reached. It's just like, why can't we travel to Mars in a day? We have not achieved the intellectual gravitas that we need to understand how to make cells move through space and time faster than the speed of light. The answer is there. The answer is going to be there, but it may take us that long for us. The same way as, you go back a couple thousand years, we really understand the idea that man could actually fly? I think maybe in some ways we might have, but we never could figure out how to actually do it 2,000 years ago. We may have figured it out 20,000 years ago, but we didn't figure it out 2,000 years ago. It took us a couple thousand years to recognize, if you put that wing in this particular shape, oh, guess what? That may give you lift. Wow. That's the same thing. It took us, enough uh, active brain cells to figure out how to do that. It's going to take us more than we have right now to figure out that this endocannabinoid system is more important than anything else we have in our body.
You are 100% correct, Montel. And look, I've seen comments that if we had the FAA today, that the Wright brothers wouldn't have got off the ground. So
Right.
if we look at regulation and we look at studies and we look at these lobbyists who push back against this product, I can speak to a recent bill that was put forward by our Greens here, which is sort of a environmentally friendly progressive party, that put forward a bill at the federal level to legalize cannabis for adult use, and to create a regulated availability model so that it could be sold just as similar to other products in a controlled setting with limited advertising, etc. And we had the AMA, we had state enforcement officials saying, we can't do this. It's not safe. It's not safe. But if we had the FAA back then, we wouldn't have got off the ground. Technology wouldn't have advanced. We wouldn't have had then created the rocket, just because someone thought, it could blow up. And it's tragic that sometimes, that people make a misstep and try and synthesize something and it has some harmful outcome. But if we look at things from an open mind, we'll see that, cannabis legalization won't harm Indigenous populations, because if we're looking at harming and trying to mitigate harm, What we're currently doing is incarcerating Indigenous people in Australia at a 1-to-4 ratio. So every non-Indigenous person who's caught up in the judicial system for cannabis possession or in some capacity has 4 of their compatriots in the prison that are Indigenous, just because that product is used in a higher capacity, like I said at the start of our conversation, because of they using natural medicines for thousands of years. They see it just no different.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the same here in the United States. I mean, when they finally passed the bills in the United States back in 1937, which was called the Marijuana Tax Act, that literally made cannabis illegal, they did that so that they could literally re-imprison or re-enslave black and brown people. We ran out of the ability to slave people, so we decided let's use this as an excuse, and we've been doing that ever since. And unfortunately, when we did that, when we take a look at the world, I mean, the United States started that and then got the rest of the world to follow that. But then you look around the world and you see some of these medical mystery maladies that are popping up all over the place. People don't understand. You go back to the 1600s, 1700s, not a ship in the world got underway without having hemp seeds on board. They had hemp twine rope. However, they also ate a porridge of hemp seeds. Why? Because sailors knew that they didn't rot at sea. 2, it was one of the highest protein laden seeds on the planet that we had discovered at that point in time. So people walked around in the 16 and 1700s eating hemp seeds. All of our forefathers in the United States grew hemp. We had probably about 70, 80 different usages that were just there. We know that there's probably 2,500 different usages for hemp and cannabis, but we actually exploited about 80 of them, everything from rope to textiles, to rope to clothing to canvas to everything from bedding. I mean, it's so ridiculous that we can erase our history and say, oh no, this had to be really bad for people. And the truth of the matter is, we know that it wasn't bad for people. It was probably, if you look at a newspaper, I bet you it's in the same in Australia. If you look at a newspaper printed in 1885, 1890, there were probably in the classifieds a couple hundred different hemp-based, cannabis-based tinctures, hemp-based, cannabis-based medicines that people used all the time. I was talking to somebody the other day that just remember, those who claim to be Christian or those who claim to follow, religion. Remember, the 3 wise men showed up with Mother Mary, and they showed up carrying incense, frankincense, and myrrh. Well, what the hell is frankincense? Most people don't even understand it. That is a cannabis kind of based plant. It was good enough for the baby Jesus. It's got to be good enough for me, right? I'm just saying. I mean,
No, you're 100% correct. I grew up religious with my mother attending to Bible college. So look, I understand there is even a religious link there. If Jesus was the anointed one and he was anointing people and healing people, what was he healing them with? And that's correct. That's correct. Well, that's my theory, at least, or some concoction of olive oil mixed with cannabis oil, so it's more bioavailable, something like that. But ultimately, we can even look at the scripture, which says that God gave us every seed-bearing fruit, plant, and otherwise. So why not that? And we've got here, if I can speak to that bill that I mentioned, even with religious organizations coming in under the guise of alcohol and safety organizations pushing their agenda from a far extreme right wing perspective to say, oh well, look, we can't do this from a temperance perspective. Well, you tried that with alcohol and it didn't work out. It just forced it under the radar of law enforcement, and more people probably got harmed from contamination of alcohol products in the prohibition than if they had a regulated product where they could do it in public, or in their private, I should say.
And so it's happening right now in the United States. We have, they passed a hemp bill that allowed people to grow hemp. And so now you've got this nefarious group of people who are trying to push CBD from hemp into a THC type of product. Though THC Delta 8 does appear in the plant naturally, it appears in the plant at very, very small levels. And what you have is some nefarious people who are using under the kitchen sink counter chemicals to turn CBD into this Delta 8, which we now know is probably one of the most caustic chemicals that you could kind of create when it comes to cannabis. So, yeah, I hopefully, I mean, when is there going to be a vote for the possible legalization of cannabis in Australia?
Look, that's a great question. I'm pushing for as hard as I can for legalization. There's several bills in parliaments around Australia and New South Wales. I recently put forward a submission to that bill to try and get that up off the ground from a committee level. To then be voted on to legalise in other states. So I'm not even just looking at South Australia as an example, but all jurisdictions across Australia and beyond. We have a bill in our parliament, and I've spoken to that and submitted to that bill as well. And what I'm trying to do is ultimately push it to a vote. I've got support from the crossbench here in South Australia that would want to see it legislated at a federal level and want the vote to go to the public. But what I think is it ultimately needs a state first approach. Which will be the tipping point, because we have that decriminalization of personal use in our capital territory, where all the politicians are, and they know it's acceptable just as much as they're now moving to allow for other amounts of smaller substances. So the rose-colored glasses are coming off. They're realizing, hey, we're harming people. This is not a long-term solution. And so ultimately we're seeing progressive politicians come in and say, well, how much are we going to make? What's the cost-benefit analysis on the potential or perceived harm to the public? But
And
we've got some.
aren't the numbers pretty significant on the amount of money that's already been brought in when it comes to cannabis medically sold in Australia? What are you, around 2.5 billion a year or something like that?
Look, there's numbers bandied around, but how much of that is from companies that are selling products that are pushing those statistics? I can comfortably say it's in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Mm.
If you look at the approximation that there's 100,000 patients and they're all buying, $30 of product a year, and then that grows year on year, and it's 350, 450,000 patients. It's tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and yes, like you're saying, across the life of legalization of medicinal cannabis in Australia, it could be in the billions by now, but it's very hard to track because people are inflating those numbers, and it's very hard to get numbers on the ground to understand what the specifics are.
Are you starting to see the legal numbers impacting the black and brown market, the illegal distribution of cannabis there? Are more people apt to buy legal cannabis or illegal cannabis?
I don't think we're at that tipping point yet. I think we still need to push for legalization. And what we're seeing is even just yesterday, I read an article of a prominent doctor who started a clinic here in Australia. He's now stepping away from the industry because he's seen it become more of a quasi recreational or adult use industry, because people are just getting into medicinal because they can't get access to cultivate their own or to purchase their own for their just general use rather than medicinal. And so that's contaminating the market. So whilst we may be seeing some people step into medicinal cannabis from the black market, it's hard to determine how many of those people are medicinal users or adult use users. But what I believe ultimately is what we need is to have two separate markets. Obviously, just like alcohol for medicinal purposes, that's used for that reason, and for adult use, it's used for that reason, and it's regulated very differently. And I think we need the same approach for cannabis as an adult use product.
I
What
agree.
we're seeing.
I think here in the United States, I mean, we've gotten so many states of, we have 28 states that have a adult use market, and they kind of throw the medical market under the bus, and that's really unnecessary. That should be something that should be well defined. I think every state should have a medical market rather than just an adult use market.
Yeah, because ultimately the medicinal side of it, if there's an issue, people can go and seek the advice of doctors to say, hey, this product's not right for me. I had this effect. I need probably more CBD, or like you're saying, even with the alcohol, the acid version. Sorry, I need more THCA. I need more CBG. I need this or that. They can go and get that tailored product to a specific formulated version, and it's heavily regulated, and ultimately I like to believe it's safe, but still the regulations have a long way to come. And then if we have the other side of the coin being adult use, you could then have people going in and getting their product, and whilst they're going and getting their product, they can go and speak to someone if they're having issues with the product, and they can go and get another product. And they're going to obviously have different levels of effect ultimately, and the products that are used for adult use won't be able to be claimed as medicinal because they won't be going through those GMP or those TGO 93 standards.
Here in the United States, we have 38 states plus the District of Columbia. There's 12 states that don't have any form of cannabis laws. I mean, how's it differentiated in Australia? I mean, are all the states have access to medicinal?
All states and territories in Australia have access to medicinal, and have since 2016 incorporated that into their health system. So I speak closely with, I speak to South Australian chief pharmacists and drug and alcohol services, and other bureaucrats to inform them about medicinal cannabis, which has seen an uptick in the consumption of medicinal cannabis in South Australia. And so every other state has the option to do just the same, is to prescribe medicinal cannabis for their patients. They just have to go through the state reporting, which ultimately, for some reason, doesn't feed back to the federal level. So I've found a few disconnects there with the data. So, for example, if you're consuming medicinal cannabis in California, right, and you're getting it prescribed to you by a doctor in, say, Florida, there is no connection at a federal level as to where that data is going. So they can send it over to you in California, but ultimately the prescribing location is still Florida.
Got
So
it.
there is a disconnect there at a federal and state level. So we don't really know how many people are consuming where. And I have that from a good authority from people in the TGA, which is our Therapeutic Goods Administration, similar to your, I guess, FDA. So they have gaps at the state level, and the reporting there isn't quite there. And I think ultimately, to understand where we're at as a country, we need that reporting to be succinct.
Yeah. We don't have a lot of reciprocity in America either. I mean, there are some states that are recognizing other cards now, but a lot of states don't recognize other cards. So you have to basically get your cannabis in the state that you're in. And some of them will allow non-state residents to get cards, some don't. It's such a quagmire. But hopefully in the next couple of years that'll settle out, especially if the DEA goes ahead and issues some sort of a statement about changing it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3.
Yeah, look, I think if we see other jurisdictions jump on board, then it's going to destigmatize the overall legalization discussion. And just on your point,
Sure. I was gonna ask you, if you put your crystal ball on, what's it gonna look like in Australia, say over the next 5 to 10 years?
well, I see in at least 5 years, we're going to have some form of legalization for personal possession, cultivation, and personally believe a regulated availability model. Ultimately, 10 years from now, I like to see, like you said, Montel, is medicinal cannabis with the level of education behind it, where it gives prescribers confidence, it gives authorities in government confidence in opening up the policies around medicinal cannabis and how it's used, and ultimately maybe other substances like psilocybin for PTSD,
Right.
and other products that are shown to be, efficacious in certain circumstances. Ultimately, what I believe is in that 10-year process is we're going to have personalized cannabis related medicine, where there's a formulation where it says this has got this percentage of THC, this percentage of CBD, the acid versions of terpenes, etc., that are going to be relatively targeted to people's conditions.
Right.
And so I myself I consume cannabis under prescription and for chronic pain. So I like to think that we're going to see a massive shift away from opioids and the likes of those products to medicinal cannabis and to cannabis in general. Because what we're seeing in my literature review, which I've put through to state officials here in South Australia, and hopefully meeting shortly with the health minister here to discuss a small pilot trial for cannabis as a treatment for opioid dependency, so that we can see less people addicted to opioids, get them off. Potentially within 6 months, we're seeing cessation in some of the studies, and
There,
and,
there's
and
a there's
massive
a
improvement in quality of life.
look for the good studies out of NYU, New York University. They had a study a couple of years back, talking about cannabis as an exit drug for opioid addiction because it does work. And, lots of people around this country have already bought into that. And so now it's just a matter of getting that, widespread and acknowledged and accepted. What would you say? We're going to run out of time here, but how about, there's probably a lot of individuals, especially in the United States, who are listening to this conversation saying, wow, well, maybe I should go down to Australia and see if I can become a part of the industry down there. Will you allow non-Australian citizens to participate in your program?
Look, as long as you're getting prescribed medicinal cannabis in some format from a doctor, and they're authorized under the TGA to prescribe on the SASA or SASB scheme, and those are just two schemes for prescription, either for terminal illness or for other illnesses such as chronic pain, etc. As long as you're getting prescribed legally, that's all that we really care about. You're doing it by the book, Montel. What we embrace people coming from other jurisdictions, Canada, the US, South America, Europe, and what we've seen in our industry is a lot of cultivators come over and share their experience so that we can get up to speed with our knowledge for cultivation, so that we can put out the best case product that we can do.
Matthew, can you just tell us what kind of products do you have in Australia for medical use? I mean, here we have vaporable, smokable, edible, and edibles are in multiple forms, everything from gummies to, tinctures to tablets to pills to you name it. I mean, there's even ice cream that just came up. What kind of products do you have in Australia?
Look, I have a sweet tooth myself, so I don't mind cannabis as an edible product. Ultimately, we see a pretty restrictive model here in Australia, and I think it's still a lot due to the education from a prescriber level. We see cannabis as a raw flower. We see your extracts as oils, CBD, THC, etc. We do see some dry sift products as well. We do see vape carts, and there's a slow uptake in topicals. But a lot of companies are looking to try and register a product first in a specific
Mhm.
formulation to
Well,
alleviate. And I know there's companies that have acquired various brands that already exist in pharmacies to then incorporate, say, CBD or other cannabinoids into the products. So we
got it.
see a very sort of, I guess, I'm going whole hog into the ice cream, and maybe that's on the cards. I don't know what companies are looking at doing, but we see sort of 4 or 5 main products. Mostly flour is the big one.
Do you have,
Flour and oil.
here in the States, drinks are becoming very popular, like, carbonated drinks that have 5 to 10% THC in them. Is that popular there yet?
I can't say. Look, I haven't seen them on the market. There may be some companies starting to offer those, but I haven't. I haven't seen them. I'm not sure how doctors would feel saying, "Hey, drink this," elevated kombucha or some sort of formula, exposing them to sugars and other, potentially harmful products such as
Sure.
flavor additives, preservatives, etc. That you see in the likes of soft drinks of the quality of Monster and Red
Right.
Bulls and whatnot. So in terms of trying to have medical efficacy there, I haven't seen any uh, drinkable medicinal cannabis products.
Got it.
What's the story there? How are they say prescribing that?
You know what? And it's really weird when you say prescribing. Here in America, you get a recommendation that allows you to use cannabis. Then it's up to the individual to figure out their delivery system. So far, doctors are not saying, well, I'm prescribing you a vape cart at such and such a level. That's not what they're doing right now. And again, every state's a little different. But, like you go to a state like Massachusetts and you can go into a adult use cannabis dispensary And in that dispensary, you can get everything from a very healthy drink with just carbonation, water, and some other natural additives, not a lot of sugar, all the way through to the heavily sugar laden things, which I try my best to avoid myself. I also avoid I do consume some of the chocolates. I prefer the dark chocolates, but they do have gummies here, and some gummies have reduced sugar. Um, but it's in almost every form that you can think of. My friend, well, thank you so much for Matthew for being a part of the show and sharing so much of your insights. Keep us posted on what's been going on down there. And it's clear that while there has been progress, there's still some significant hurdles that you got to overcome, just like here in the United States when it comes between medical and recreational. But I know you guys will go figure this out. And I'd love to you to keep us posted. Let us know what's going on, okay?
Great, I will do, and I'm more than happy to come back and chat your ear off again.
Absolutely. I love for you to come back and chat my ear off. Come on, bro. I could talk about this all day with you, man. So look, you be well. You have a great day. I know the sun's popping up over there, so you're having a good start to your day. Thank you for getting up so early to doing this. And we will reach out and see if we can get you back, okay?
Thank you very much, Montel, and have a great evening.
Yes, sir, for sure. And to all our listeners out there, if you want to stay informed and support the efforts towards cannabis legalization, make sure you follow up and some of the updates from experts like Matthew, and always stay tuned to Let's Be Blunt with Montel. And make sure you hit that little subscribe button down there. And until next time, you take care, you stay informed, and take care of your family, okay? Love you guys. Be well. See you on the next Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Thanks for joining me on Let's Be Blunt with Montel. Please make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell to be notified when new episodes post each week. We'd love to hear your feedback also, so please send us your comments.